According to the Department of Justice, in 2025, the third most destructive wildfire in the history of California and the most destructive wildfire to ever burn in Los Angeles was started when a man described in the news as an incel essentially intentionally set fire to some dry vegetation, which the fire department mostly extinguished, except for a small blaze that smoldered underground for days before the wind blew it up into one of the worst disasters in 21st century American history. Now, I'm not an expert on fire by any means, and maybe that's why it was crazy to me that something so small could turn into this. But then again, that's how fire works. It spreads, especially in an area as dry as Southern California. The DOJ believes this guy was trying to cover his trail because when he called 911 to report the fire, he made a screen recording of himself asking ChatGPT if you can be at fault for starting a fire with a cigarette. Which is, if that's true, trying to screen record yourself asking an AI a question is a crazy way to cover your tracks for starting a fire. By the way, ChatGPT told him, yes, he will be at fault. So according to the feds, Jonathan worked as an Uber driver in Los Angeles on New Year's Eve 2024, and he picked up and dropped off his last two passengers from 10:15 to 11:15 that night. And both of these passengers told law enforcement that Jonathan seemed agitated during the drive. One passenger told Fox News that the driver was a, quote, nut job, and that he kept going on about not being able to find girls. Now, he was stated to have been putting fire-related prompts into ChatGPT in the months leading up to the fire, allegedly including a burning forest and people running away from a fire. And here's a pretty deranged picture of him supposedly from his Facebook. So it seems like the government believes they have a pretty good case against him as a disillusioned pyromaniac. But let's take a look at how all this started. Because when it happened, the conspiracy theories were everywhere, from lasers being shot from space to the fire purposely being started so a huge land grab could take place. And I must admit, it was very strange to see that insurance companies chose not to renew their policies on over 10,000 structures in Los Angeles, including in the Pacific Palisades just before the fires. But anyway, according to the federal paperwork, Jonathan completed his last Uber ride of the night when he dropped someone off in the Pacific Palisades area. Shortly after this, he drove toward the Skull Rock hiking trail in Topanga State Park. He also recorded a video of himself on a hilltop in the area. And then, a little after midnight, environmental sensors detected a fire around Via Las Palmas Street, which is less than a block away from Topanga State Park. Now, the fire was supposedly contained sometime between 4:46 and 7:51 a.m., but sources vary on the time, as some say it was contained before 5 a.m., while others say it was closer to 8 a.m. And although no structural damage was reported, it appeared that as of February 2025, some of the houses in the area would end up being destroyed, most likely by the Palisades fire that followed. But initially, Jonathan reported the fire as he was fleeing the scene, and it's then that authorities say he turned around to follow the fire trucks back to the trail so he could watch the fire burn. And this is where the DOJ says he lied about where he was when he witnessed the fire, claiming that they have geolocation data from his phone putting him just 30 feet from where the blaze started, which will be pretty damning in court. But of course, once the fire department left the scene, the fire had not been completely extinguished, and there was still a fire smoldering underground for about 6 days until high wind pushed it to the surface, and then, well, it will proceed to burn an area nearly half the size of Seattle. And it doesn't look good for Jonathan, as an assistant attorney general even says he messaged his ex-girlfriend saying he wanted to flee to Bali in Indonesia, which is famously a country that doesn't typically extradite. But what would be his motive? One side of the media says he set fire because he was angry, and the other side says he did it because he hated Donald Trump and he was an incel. But two things that stood out to me was the report about the question he put in the ChatGPT regarding whether he'd be liable for starting a fire with a cigarette, and the fact that he called 911 to report the fire could still mean that either he did it on purpose and he wanted the blaze out, or he did it on accident and he wanted the blaze out as well, which is confusing either way, but it's clear he wanted the fire to be put out. If what the government says is true, then the Palisades fire following this incident was by pure chance, as even if Jonathan did start the Lakeman fire on purpose, he would have had no way to predict that the fire department couldn't fully extinguish it and that the wind would eventually sweep it into a larger fire. It's possible that if he started the fire on purpose, he could have regretted the decision quickly and tried to get the fire put out by calling 911. And honestly, he's pretty lucky that he's not being charged with murder for any of the deaths that occurred as a result of the fire, so it's possible federal prosecutors don't believe he intended for the fire to become what it was. But that's the thing about fire. It becomes hard to contain, and playing with fire is literally a metaphor for doing anything with a high probability for danger. But it's also possible the media is using him as a scapegoat for bigger issues that let the fire keep growing, such as numerous reports of low water pressure and even city officials in LA stating that the water system in the area is not built to fight wildfire. wildfires. What the prosecutors allege happened is called a holdover fire, where smoldering can take place for days underground before being swept up into a full-blown wildfire. And these are a real threat from California to Alaska, where they're called zombie fires, and they can even smolder beneath the snow in Alaska for months just using the fuel-rich soil. But it also doesn't help Jonathan's case that he said to have threatened arson before, and the paperwork even says that he told ChatGPT that he felt liberated when he burned a Bible. Now, this seems like a sign of a mentally disturbed man confiding his secrets into an AI chatbot, which can and did have his history pulled. The prosecutors also called him a flight risk because he has family ties in Europe where either his father or both of his parents work as Christian missionaries. And an ATF agent working the case even says there was a police report involving him, his father, and his brother-in-law where he had a gun. He clearly didn't follow his parents' religion, so maybe his upbringing has something to do with his mental state. But either way, whether he wanted the entire city to burn down or not, he called the authorities not long after to put the blaze out, and like I said, there's no way he could have known it would smolder for nearly a week. From everything I've read, he seemed to get a thrill from watching things burn, and he may have even fantasized about such a fire happening. But I haven't found any links between him and any conspiracy theory, and as for the mysterious actions of the home insurance companies just before the fire, it probably has nothing to do with the suspect, because regardless, over the past decade, the most destructive wildfires in Southern California all took place between December and January. And in that January, while the Palisades fire was burning, the Eden fire was burning on the other side of LA County at the same time, and it became the second most destructive wildfire in California history. In fact, there were 8 different wildfires in Southern California within a span of just 24 days in January. So if there is a conspiracy theory involving the insurance companies, I'd say it had much more to do with them predicting when the most property would be destroyed. In the summer before that January, when many people were notified that their home insurance policies were not being renewed, I've seen reports that since the average cost of home insurance in California was cheaper than other states, many companies made this decision to prevent losing money, which would be a reasonable decision as a business. Probably not the most ethical thing to do, but it's true, California has less expensive home insurance than places like Texas, Nebraska, and Oklahoma. And while that might explain one part, the mayor cutting over $17 million from the fire department's budget in Southern California seems like an extremely questionable decision that gave rise to more conspiracy theories. And although it could be argued that no water system in the world could prevent the constant threat of ever-growing wildfires in California, you could also argue that the fire department is not a department that should experience any major cuts. But to give credit to the city, the fire department's budget has only been growing since 2019. And honestly, the biggest factor in the wildfire's devastation is probably us. LA is a beautiful city in some parts, and it's been set up as a tourist hotspot as well as a place for rich people to retreat into the hills so they don't have to look at poor people. No one is supposed to have a green lawn in Los Angeles. It should look more like the suburbs in Arizona where everyone just has rocks in their yard. Even the palm trees aren't supposed to be there. Only one species of palm tree is native to the entire state of California. But in the 1930s, when the state tried to market the city as a tropical paradise like Miami, they realized that palm trees would probably sell that lie a lot better. Regardless of any conspiracy theories or if this guy really is an idiot, there probably still would have been a huge fire anyway that the fire department couldn't control. But Southern California is essentially set up for wildfires at this point, and that's just due to poor planning on part of the United States. I'm sorry for anyone that had to actually experience this fire, and especially people that lost property. It just simply is not natural for so much water to be funneled from the northern part of the state just so the southern part can be green. But maybe one year Southern California will get some historic rainfall to make up for this intense drought that it went through. But that's all I got for today, man. I'll see you guys next time.